Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, as the economics of Brexit sparked a standoff on the high street, its political and constitutional issues saw two new fronts being opened today. In a moment, we'll be hearing from our political editor in Glasgow on the SNP's battle readiness. But first, let's go to Fatima Manji, who is in the High Court in London for the launch of a legal challenge to try and force the government to hold a parliamentary vote on leaving the EU. Fatima, spell it out for us. What could this court challenge mean?
Well, Kathy, it's quite important to say this isn't about rerunning the referendum through the court process. This is about how and when that process of Brexit should begin. Although the court challenge has been brought about by people who backed the Remain side, and some of their backers were outside court protesting today, brandishing EU flags, and were promptly met by a counter-protest of people who want Article 50 to be triggered now and are telling lawyers to keep their hands off our democracy. A visual reminder, if ever there was one, of how divided the nation might become on this. Now, this court case centres around who has the right to trigger Article 50, that process where Britain starts to begin negotiating leaving the EU. Should it be the Prime Minister and ministers? That is what Theresa May believes, using a royal prerogative. Or should that sovereignty lie with Parliament? That's what those behind this case are arguing. Now, why is this important? Aside of being perhaps the most important constitutional court case of our time, because it could set limits on the government's executive power, in terms of Brexit, it's absolutely crucial, because if the government lose the power for what Brexit looks like, how it should begin, when it begins, could be handed back to MPs here in Parliament.
And Fatima, there's been a development at the European end as well, hasn't there? Tell us about that.
That's right. The President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, who will be overseeing those negotiations between London and Brussels when they eventually begin, has actually made comments about Brexit today in his speech. He says that the idea of soft Brexit is useless to speculate about. Now, that's this suggestion that soft Brexit would be Britain staying in the single market, still keeping EU benefits, perhaps having to accept freedom of movement. Donald Tusk says, forget about all that. There's only two options, hard Brexit or no Brexit at all. Now, he accepts that the idea that that might happen at the moment is very unlikely, but there's a suggestion perhaps that Britain may change its mind. Now, his comments today and the beginning of that court case are crucial, because that question of what Brexit actually means is much more complicated.
Fatima, thanks very much. Well, Scotland voted for the UK to remain in the EU, and the country's First Minister says she isn't happy about the moves towards a hard Brexit. Today, she promised to publish a bill within days, paving the way for a second referendum on Scottish independence before the UK leaves the EU. But she stopped short of a promise to hold the vote. Well, over now to our political editor, Gary Gibbon in Glasgow. Gary.
Well, what Nicola Sturgeon was trying to do today here in Glasgow was a few different things. One of them was to show real menace towards Theresa May. She's about to come down 10 days' time, Nicola Sturgeon, and see her with an articulated lorry full of demands. She wants Brussels powers not brought back to London, but devolved straight to Holyrood. She wants Scotland to remain a full member of the single market. She's going to come down with those, and she wants to wield a sort of claymore threat with the threat of another referendum over Theresa May's head. And in that, she's also, a second strand of this, trying to play to the sympathies of the people who are in the hall here, her supporters around Scotland, who feel that England is diverging still more politically from Scotland post-Brexit. But what she's also emphatically trying to do today is maintain wriggle room, make sure that all these threats don't box her in terms of the timings of a second referendum, because she's not sure if it was called right now, next year or even the year after, she would win it. This is how what one of her aides said was a delicate situation. This was how Nicola Sturgeon dealt with it on the first day of the SNP conference.
The Brexit vote cast a gloom over much of Scotland. 62% here voted to stay in the EU. In Glasgow at the SNP conference, Nicola Sturgeon attacked Theresa May for her xenophobic anti-immigrant tone. She said she'd produce plans to keep Scotland closer to Europe, still a full member of the single market. But she got her biggest cheer when she warned the Prime Minister she was ready to call a second independence referendum before Brexit happens.
But hear this. If you think for one single second that I am not serious about doing what it takes to protect Scotland's interests, then think again. I am determined that Scotland will have the ability to reconsider the question of independence and to do so before the UK leaves the EU if that is necessary to protect our country's interests. So I can confirm today that the independence referendum bill will be published for consultation next week.
It was a line intended to thrill those who want a second independence referendum within 2 years. But the First Minister was careful not to box herself in on dates. Different delegates heard different things.
I think she will call a referendum if the terms of Brexit are unacceptable.
So that means within 2 years?
Yes.
The timing will come when she thinks it's right.
And you're happy to leave that judgment?
Oh, yes, indeed. I mean, that's why she's our leader.
Might even be as quick as next year, yes.
Yeah, I believe that.
Well, I
think so as well. That's what you came away thinking.
Yes, next year.
What if it's not? What if it's not for quite a few years because she's waiting, Nicola Sturgeon's waiting until she can be sure of victory? Are you willing to be that patient?
Oh, I don't know. Really don't know.
I'm never going to be able to do this. Not under pressure.
Nicola Sturgeon didn't commit to that timing because Brexit hasn't led to a surge in support for independence, and because her vote split. The British Election Study estimates that 37% of the Brexit vote in Scotland was made up of people who'd backed Scottish independence.
You supported independence in 2014, 2 years ago, but you voted for Brexit.
Yes. I know. Just doing what I thought was right at the time, and now I'm just like, I don't know.
Just felt right at the time.
Yeah, just felt right at the time. But now I think it's because nobody knows, but we don't know if it's going to be good. We don't know if it's going to be bad until it happens.
And there's been movement the other way too.
Independence this time, definitely.
Brexit's changed your views.
Totally.
Do you think that goes for a lot of other people?
I would agree with that. Well, I know my mum, my mother, my brothers were all the same, voted to stay in because we're
And they've
one
all
island
switched.
and they have all switched.
The polls suggest a referendum now would have pretty much the same result as the one that happened 2 years ago. But the headline numbers conceal what pollsters call churn, shifts below the surface. Older voters without qualifications who backed Brexit have moved away from independence. But some of the better off, horrified by Brexit, have moved towards it.
I think there's quite a lot of movement below the surface. I mean, one thing's for sure is that there are sections of the elites in Scotland who are now thinking about independence and not dismissing it in the way that they did back in 2014. And that's not to say that there's a massive shift in favour of independence. The polls don't show that, and I'm not convinced that that has happened.
But they could be
But they're
important opinion
neutralised.
formers.
They could be very important opinion formers, and at the very least, I think some of the opposition in 2014 has probably been neutralised as a consequence of the Brexit vote.
Who's driving the bus?
Nicola Sturgeon knows the second attempt at an independence vote must succeed. There might not be a third. Brexit has raised the pressure on Nicola Sturgeon to call that vote sooner than she'd planned. Today was an attempt to ride that wave without getting dragged in. Gary Gibbon, Channel 4 News, at the SNP conference in Glasgow.